Okay, welcome guys. We're doing this virtual. It's been a while since I've done one of these. But we're gonna continue on with the kind of upbringing to imperialism. You guys should have read that article talking about imperialism a little bit. And that's kind of just like the reasons for it, right? How did we get to that point? Uh, we're gonna build off what we left off. If you guys remember, uh, if I can. There we go. You guys remember, right? We talked about all this stuff with like how Europe kind of went to the West, and now I'm fast forwarding too much now. Okay, let me get back. Right, so we talked about kind of all that last slides. Now Europe's out of this world, right? If you look and you see my cursor, right? We've talked about kind of how, Europe was secluded to, where it was at. It was Rome. People came in and then boom, they hit the Americas, Christopher Columbus, all that. That was colonialism, right? What we're going to talk about is what happens after that, right? What happens after they land there, Spain, France, England, and how do you see now, as this map we have right here is the world of 1700s, how is Europe all over, right? How is Europe in Africa? How is it in Asia? Where are we getting with there? But before we do that, though, I have to dive in a little bit about the specifics of what's going on in Europe, because I've talked a lot about competition. And this is kind of going to build up on that a little bit. Right. So the buildup. Again, timeline. I like doing these. Right. So you can see the dominoes, right? What domino led to the next domino? We have the Columbian Exchange, leads to Reformations, leads to the Dutch, the rise of the English, decline of the Spanish, the Enlightenment, one of my favorite eras of all time, the Seven Years' War, the French being the French. If you know a little bit about history, the French always lose, hint, hint. And then Vive la Revolutions, both the French and the Spanish and the American. There's a lot of Latin Americans, a lot of revolutions going on. Okay, right, but we left off with Spain. Spain's top tier, right? Spain's at the top, everywhere else. Portugal's kind of up there with them, but everything else is just like it's cooked, right? Um, right. So Spain wanted to spread their religion to these uncivilized nations. If you did the reading, you kind of would see something similar about that, right? That white man's burden. That comes later, but that idea is always in Europe's head that like we are the most civilized, everywhere else are barbarians. We have to kind of civilize them to this extreme level, right? Like they're not on our level. We got to get them up there. In actuality, Europe's kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. Like, of course, you have your native like your native peoples and your indigenous people who are not kind of exposed to a lot of the old world, but that doesn't mean they're not civilized. Like, look at the Aztecs. They're very sophisticated for being these people secluded for so many years. Um, so, right, Europe's thinking is that they're superior than a lot of these people, right? And a byproduct of doing that, right? They got golden glory for their efforts. Again, glory is important because all the European countries are fighting each other. You want the glory. Going back to that last part of the lecture too, right? The glory of the Roman Empire. They want that. As a product of Spain and other European countries colonizing, they brought disease with them, killing off millions of indigenous people, right? The Aztecs lost because 90% of the people died of a disease. Of course, Spanish weaponry was far more superior, but excuse me, but the Aztecs had great fighting, hand-to-hand combat. You're not beating the Aztecs one-on-one, but you do beat them when there's only 10 of them compared to like 1,000 of you, right? So now there's this need for labor to produce gold and farm cash crops, so that they need a lot of people to help out, right? Um, you need people mining the golds. You need people doing what sugarcane fields, doing tobacco fields, doing the cotton fields, whatever it is. You need the people. So the little indigenous people there is left, they're using them for labor. And especially the early wave of colonialism, the Spanish were very cruel to those people, especially indigenous people and natives of that area. But of course, as we go on, there's a lot less sort of strict people who are ruling. They're still, unkind, treating these indigenous people terribly. But they do actually give the indigenous people more and more rights or opportunity to get more and more rights in the Spanish civilization. But how do you get that though? You have to believe in Christianity. You have to join the religion. You have to join them, or kind of a fancy word we're going to say is assimilate to Spanish culture. And so when you do, that's how they kind of get into the Spanish system and aren't as uh and like that world isn't as bad as the slavery we think of like the Americas, right? That was strictly harsh, black and white. This it was very complex, right? And then at the same time, we have the Portuguese who didn't want to spread their religion, but just wanted money. Portuguese just cared about the trade routes, right? So by doing that, they established themselves as the best maritime traders, right? They had their colonies in Africa that they can stop at so they can get around Africa, then boom, go to Asia. And then, of course, Portuguese got Brazil. So we'll get into this kind of Columbian exchange, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And so, with this need of labor and the Portuguese access to slaves and trade routes, we see the rise of the Columbian exchange. And then, if you look over here to the left, my little meme, right? So, Hernan Cortez, we talked, he was the main conquistador in the Aztec Empire. Moctezuma II, he was the leader of the Aztec Empire. So, if you guys are familiar with Star Wars, when Anakin says, I brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to my new empire, Montezuma is like your new empire, like what this is my area. So I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so now the Columbian Exchange, right? I'm sure you guys probably have heard this from previous years. This is a very big topic, especially for us. The thing with the Columbian exchanges is it's just a giant triangle, right? So North America to Europe, Europe to Africa, Africa back to Americas, right? Not just North America, but all the Americas, right? So the Europeans would come here, take goods from Europe and people from Africa and other goods from that, bring it over to their colonies in America, and then take the resources that they didn't have in Europe from the Americas back to Europe, right? Because you imagine, like, if you draw a line down here, everything on the right side, right? They're all familiar with this. It's the old world. Everything on the left side, right, where my mouse is by the potatoes, right? That's all the new world. So they're just trying to bring everything they can back. Plus, they're trying to trade with Asia, right? So Asia has no idea most of these goods exist. So they're trying to now, Europe is trying to now sell this to Asia to make money, right? So they're using these goods to make a profit while taking the goods they have to kind of establish themselves in these colonies. So this Columbian exchange is how the world kind of gets connected a little bit. It can also explain a lot, right? How the Americas gets diversified, right? How you get Europeans, you get natives, you get Mexicans, you get Africans, you get all these different blends of races now because of these kind of Columbian exchange. Plus all the different goods, right? Bananas now coming to the tropical eras of Central and South America, right? You get wheat, coffee. Horses, which were native to Europe, are now flourishing in the Americas. So again, cattle, chickens, right? All these things are coming over here now. And it's just imagine just a giant triangle. Okay, so now, right, we have sort of the rise of different religious ideologies. Now, this is a big, big shift from what we're looking. We're looking at kind of the like militant and political and economic. Now we have to look at religious. And the reason why we have to look at religions because at this time, Europe is now out of the Dark Ages, right? And in that, they didn't care. It was the church's word. Churches say religion goes how it is. But now people are starting to question a lot of things. They're not taking the church's word for absolute anymore. So, in addition to European countries competing against each other for glory, another form of competition comes through different religious ideologies. We've already seen the schism, right, with Orthodox Christianity and the Roman Catholic, right, Christianity, right? There's already been a split in Christianity. Now we're adding more to the splits, right? So Martin Luther, who's this guy up here on the right, and sort of the rise of Protestantism, right? So if you're a Protestant Christian, you're coming from Luther, right? It's also known as Lutheranism, right? They can go by different names, but this guy started it. And so the whole backing or of why he decided to split from the mainstream Roman Catholic was because he was a theologian, so someone who studies theology or religion, and he was giving a lecture on the Romans, and he had a revelation, right? It's the faith that saves you. And Christ died for you, and you were saved by the last death. The church did nothing, right? And then later, eventually, priests in town started to sell forgiveness for your sins, and he despised that, right? He couldn't tolerate the church's exploitation, and he decided to write this 95 theses, right? So essentially, what it is, it's 95 ideas about why the Roman Catholic Church was terribly wrong. And he originally wrote this 95 thesis only in Latin. He only wrote it in Latin because he only wanted the elites to do it, to read it so they could debate with Luther. He didn't want the regular people to learn about this. But someone took these 95 theses and translated it into German. And now here's our key element that's kind of pushing us into this new era. The start of the printing press, right? Johannes Gutenberg invented this machine that basically you're allowed to take anything, print it on paper, and you can make mass copies of something. We know it today as just a printer, right? But this printing press revolutionized a lot of things. One, you have to think about nobody's reading in the Dark Ages, right? So from 500 to 1400, nobody's reading unless you had money, wealth, or status, which again, were only the kings. The peasants, you're just working. So what this printing press does is you push out so many books now. You push out so many things where people can get access to reading. You're going to start reading, right? So if I have thousands of pages in front of me now, I'm going to start reading it, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's anything. And so the first thing from the printing press was the Gutenberg Bible, right? So they translated the Bible and they mass printed it for people to read. So people now actually can read the Bible instead of just relying on the word of the priest from the church, which is a huge change. Now, with the printing press, right, reading levels kind of were going down and down and down. When the printing press happened, it went down, 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 and then reading levels and people's ability to read just started skyrocketing. Right, so that's a little background to the printing press. And so when this dude took Martin Luther's 95 Theses, um, he put it in the printing press and he mass produced this. It's one of the first things besides the Bible that got mass produced by the printing press. Now, everybody is reading kind of his argument that why are we following the church when they did nothing? And it's in fact Jesus who's the one who saved us, right? So everybody's now wait a minute, he's not wrong, right? So the church really isn't doing anything. Why are we following the church? Why are we giving our money to the church when we could just start believing in the faith itself, right? It's Jesus. He's the one who died for us. We should be praying to him to forgive our sins, not just paying the church. So now a lot of people are seeing the exploitation of the church in this era. Like the church is there for money, right? It's been around. You don't be around for thousands of years without some sneaky tactics, right? And so clearly people are starting to expose the church as a fraud. And so Protestantism skyrockets after this. It's one of the top religions in Europe, right? Like Roman Catholic is still the main one, but a lot of these side areas that aren't agreeing with Roman Catholic are now switching to Protestantism. And this causes a lot of conflict, right? Because again, you're a different religion, we hate you. That's kind of the motive of Europe, right? If you're not with me, you're against me. Whereas other places really don't care, right? So you also get a different ideology coming out of this too. I mean, you get several different ideologies, but these are the mainstream ones, right? So the second major ideology comes from John Calvin and the rise of Calvinism. It's this guy on the right. Calvin argued that theologically, so the study of religion, humans don't get salvation, right? You're predestined by God to be saved or to be damned, right? So from the very beginning, your kind of story is already written. And that's what he argues. He's like, it doesn't matter how much you try to forgive your sins, salvation's by God's grace and mercy. It's not what you can do to save it, right? You're going to be cooked or you're not cooked, right? That's just how you come out, right? If you know Greek mythology, it's like the fates, they already woven your string or something like that. So this doesn't spread as rapidly as Protestantism does, but it has a strong following in France, Switzerland, Scotland. And the big one we need to look at is France, right? That's kind of the big key European player here. So the rise of all these different religions spark a war in Europe over what the true religion is. And anything about Europe is they love to have a good war, especially on the basis of religion. Look at the Crusades, right? So now kind of Europe's fractured, right? And a combination with they're competing for glory, right? So who's can be more glorious than saying, well, we just, destroyed uh or like and then what I'm trying to say, like, we destroyed your religion, we're better. And then also, we got more land, we're better, right? So they're just fighting on so many different fronts for competition and ways to compete with each other. Um, and so if we look at our map here, let me move. Right, so if we look at our map here. So the orange, this light orange, it's Roman Catholicism, right? It's still the main religion, especially Spain, especially during this area. They are a part of the Holy Roman Empire. Philip V, who's from Spain, the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella of Aragon and Castile, right, still has ties to the Holy Roman Empire. So that explains why, Spain and Portugal and a large majority of Europe is Roman Catholic. As you can see, Germany does not exist yet. That is more Austria and what Hungary, right? So that area, Italy, the Netherlands, kind of a big chunk of Germany. Belgium doesn't exist. So a lot of modern countries have not existed yet. These are just big chunks of lands that still exist, right? And then you look at other, right? So the German area, right? So Luther was a German, right? If what we would classify as German. He is kind of taking over Protestantism over here. England and Scotland becomes Calvinist. Also get a little influx of Protestantism going in there. We have our Eastern Orthodox over here, and then you kind of get a mix of Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox in between the two empires, the Holy Roman Empire and now the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottomans did take over the Byzantiums, right? And then, right, you have the Muslim influence and then Calvinist influence in between those. Right, overall, Europe's kind of fracturing religiously at this point. It's not as sound as just Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, right? You have two main branches. Now there's several different seeds coming from that. And then again, funny meme, right? If you know the Spider-Man meme, me and the boys about to cause a schism in Christianity. We get our second schism, the first of 1054. Now we get another split, or schism's the fancy religious term. Right. So the forgotten power, right? The Dutch. So I said the Dutch were the crazy ones, right? The Dutch is Netherlands. They're the crazy ones because they're so tiny, right? But now they're like expanding a bit. But they come victorious or they come to power because of all this religious warfare, right? So Netherlands was under Spanish control for a while because of Charles V, right? Charles V is the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, becomes the Holy Roman Emperor because his father's the Duke of Austria. Again, Duke is just like the sub-level to king, like you have king, Duke, Lord, all those, right? He controls the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, right? So if we go back to our map here, Holy Roman Empire and Spain, right? So everything basically in the orange, right? And so Spain obtains the Netherlands because it's a part of the Holy Roman Empire going back, right? Netherlands is in that orangish area, and it's kind of in the gray, but that's still Holy Roman Empire. And so Antwerp is this major city, trading hub in Netherlands, but for Spain, right? And so Antwerp is kind of think of it as like it's a coastal city up here on near England, but on the Netherlands, right? And so cells of Protestantism and Calvinism grew there. So not only do you have just two men, you have three religions growing in there, right? So constant fighting, constant warfare. So war broke out. And this is known as the 80 Years' War because of it's a Calvinist rebellion. This war of Dutch independence against the Spanish kind of, because the Dutch come out to be Calvinist, a little bit of Protestantism. And so it's a religious warfare in addition to fighting for the Dutch independence. So the Dutch became tolerant because of so many religions that are there. You have Catholics, you have Protestants, you have um, what was the last one? Calvins, right? You have so many different strings of religion. They just decide to be tolerant, right? Like most people, when you're tolerant, you're focused on one thing, the money, right? So Dutch becomes tolerant and shifts hubs to Amsterdam, the city we all know, right? This becomes a major trading city now. So Antwerp was the capital, now it's Amsterdam. Um, and so the Bourse or the Dutch Wall Street, right? Early attempts at stocks, right? The earliest attempt at a stock market that we're familiar, like Wall Street, right? So they moved to Amsterdam and successfully make a successful joint stock company. And so what stocks essentially are is that they have no money, right? Or very limited. And they say, hey, give us money. And in return, we'll promise to double your money. And that's what they do, right? So people buy into this company, right? So anybody, right? So I could buy into the company. A regular citizen could buy into the company. So let's say I give $10 to help out on their journey. So I give them $10. They go make a journey. They come back. They make a profit. I get $20 instead of 10. Oh, I want to invest again. So I'll give them $20. They go back. I come back. They make more money. $40. All right. So each time you're investing in them, they will return your investment back plus some. And so they create the Dutch East India Company. If you're familiar or anything with Britain, Britain also has a British East India Company, but the Dutch were the first to really do it. It lets people buy stocks and returns of riches traded with Asia. And again, paves the way for the British East India Company. So what they would do, what the Dutch would do is since Amsterdam is a trading hub, they would go down, right? Yeah, here it is. So we'll say, use my map. So Netherlands, right? In the purple up here. So they would trade with Asia and over here. So what they would do is like kind of go around, do the trade route, whether you cut through the Mediterranean or you go all the way around Africa to Asia. But they would trade over there, and then when they trade over there, uh, they would bring the goods back and basically sell the goods in Europe. All right, and whatever profit they would get from that is then what they would return their investment for many people. So, I mean, it's a gamble because the ship could sink, right? And then you have no goods. But again, you invested, so like that's what the stock market crashes. So you're gambling on the fact that your people, your traders, can go to Asia, get the goods, and come back. And if they do, you make bank. If they die or if they crash or they're stranded, you're not making anything. Right. So it's essentially putting a bet on whether people can make it to Asia or not. And which is why it's risky, but when it pays out, it pays out. I mean, just like all gambling, right? And then here, I have a map. Again, lands in the hands of Charles V, specifically, who is the new king of Spain. Um, he had all the control. Again, territories that were his, Netherlands, half of Italy, right? Naples, parts of the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, because again, his father was from there, right? And then parts of modern day Germany, but I would imagine this is just France or Austria, if there's not a name, Italy even, right? Okay, so back to the Dutch, right? So they started trading in East Asia. And then the Dutch rebelled against the Spanish and did so with this newfound wealth of trading, this new Dutch East India Company. They're making so much money. And so they invested a lot in guns, which again, a lot of people aren't really industrialized at this time. You guys just saw that in your paper, right? Industrialization was a key reason for resources. Meaning is that like European had resources beginning to make these industrialized tools or weapons, then they run out. Hence why they need more, right? But this is the early start of it, right? Where they're kind of figuring out the technology for it. They fought the Portuguese off the coast of Africa, is actually how they did get a lot of their resources and a lot of territories too, and how they were able to go around Africa. And then in 1648, they finally got recognized as an independent country. 80 years war overlaps with the 30-year war at the time, so you have two separate wars going on in Europe during the 17th century. The 80 Years' War, which was we said, well, go back, the Calvinist rebellion kind of, and then the 30 Years' War was the Protestants versus Catholics. So you have the Calvins versus the Catholics, and you have the Protestants versus the Catholics, right? So all three are just fighting, or all of them are just fighting the Catholics, right? Um, and again, right, if we look at this map, Catholicism is the main thing of Europe. It's the Holy Roman Empire, right? So of course that's the one who's kind of getting a lot of attention. So again, recap of the Dutch, right? So they were tolerant. They used theological principles to justify their tolerance. So theological, again, the study of religion, or religious ideas, right? They become a republic, right? Think about the Roman Republic. They become kind of a democracy, right? Where the people have a say, and the joint stock company shows that the people can invest into this thing, right? It's not just for the elites, but average citizens can participate. Now, I say average citizens, most likely it's land-owning citizens. That's how a lot of these things are. It's not until we get a little bit later where we see it's now going to start becoming your average citizen. And then in 1688, when James II turned England, right? So now we got to talk about England a little bit, to Catholic, right? So they were Protestants or Calvinists. Now they're Catholic and forced the conversion. This started sort of the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution was Protestants fighting back against turning to Catholicism. Uh, what happens is William the Orange, who was Dutch, goes over to England to rule after James II gets kicked out. Now, this is crucial, right? Because what does that mean? That means is James II, who was an English leader, lost to the Protestants. He's trying to turn everyone Catholic. He lost the Protestants. The Dutch had a large Protestant grouping, put one of their own in charge of England, right? So if we go to a map, someone from the Netherlands, this purple, went over, married the queen, and started ruling England. So hence why England, you know, and this is now we're in the late, so this isn't as accurate, right? It says Calvinist now, but all of this whole area, this whole top area turns, what is Luther? Turns gray, right? This whole top area is now gray because William the Orange, right? Uh, that impacts England a lot, right? This impacts England a lot because if you also look at this time, right, you're also getting America kind of revolting and America being its foundation. When America revolts 100 years after this, right? Because they see religious tolerance, they go over, a lot of people are going over because of this conversion, actually, forced conversion by James II. And so when William the Orange kicks in, you get a little peacefulness, but then when the taxing and all that comes in, that's when America succeeds, right? So this impacts the Western side of the world now, right? Because now you have religious toleration, you have people fighting based on religion, and people left England to the Americas for religious salvation, right? They did not want to be hated on for their religion. So it's interesting now. We're seeing a lot of shifts happening in England. Then also at the same time, we're getting people thinking outside of the box, or as we'll call it, Enlightenment thinking. So we have John Locke, right? John Locke ran to Netherlands during this glorious revolution, and he got exposed to this new Dutch culture, and specifically the Republic and toleration. Uh, we'll talk about John Locke on this slide, and he's going to come important, but John Locke starts a lot of key movements, being the Enlightenment. Now, with the Enlightenment, there's two phases of it. You have your science, or your natural science, your natural philosophy, and then you have your politics and philosophy, right? So with the Enlightenment, why this is so crucial is now, in the Mid Ages, no thinking was happening. Nobody was thinking. Everybody just took the word of the church and said, okay, yes, I believe you. Now, we're getting to this era where people begin to start questioning the world, right? How do things work? Intellectuals begin to trying to solve how the world works and how society works, right? How the world works. How, for instance, when you go outside, it's snowing. How is that, right? Then also, how are we able to communicate with one another? How are we able to live together and function together? How do we know how to eat, right? So all those things are now what people are starting to question. So natural philosophy is equated with science, right? The natural world and the philosophy of that world, or we call it today as science. They start questioning whether God is the reason for why everything occurs. Because if you think about it, the church is kind of going on just saying, God made everything. This is all done by God. God, 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 God. But does that really explain things? Does that give that logical explanation for why it actually exists? Right? What is the reasoning or the logical reasoning is what a lot of people started questioning. And so you get a couple people. Big one is Copernicus, right? With this heliocentric theory of planetary motion. Basically, that's fancy words to just say everything revolves around the sun, right? He imagined this was the sun, right? What was theorized by the church is you have the sun, and then let's say this is the earth. The church's theory was that everything revolved around the earth. The earth was the center of the universe. Everything revolves around it. Copernicus said, no, 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 no. That makes no sense. He said, we're not the center of the earth. The sun is the center of the earth, and the earth and everything else revolves around that. And so he switches and directly contradicts the church. Big no-no at this time, right? But he's basically correct. His theory is what we use today. The sun is the center of our universe and everything goes around it, right? The sun is the middle, kind of the center point, and then the things swirl. So Copernicus was correct. And then Enlightenment thinking is also based off observation of the world, right? You have Galileo Galileo and Isaac Newton. Galileo Galileo basically discovered planets, discovered stars. The Earth revolves around the sun. That whole spiel, right? It kind of to Copernicus. He was kind of a came after Copernicus and added on to his theories, right? But just about the stars of the world, universe. But again, church said no. Earth center of the universe, or Earth center of the universe, not the sun. And so Galileo got excommunicated by the church. Big thing. Isaac Newton, you guys know, you guys should have talked about it in science, but again, his three laws of gravity, right? Um, his first law, right? Isaac Newton's three laws. First law, what every object has an equal and opposite reaction. Um, Second law is force time equals mass times acceleration. And then his third law is, what is his third law? Uh, every action. Well, we're gonna look this up. Hold up. Three laws of Newton. I can't believe I forget this. Law of inertia. An object stay at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion. Oh, so I missed it. So the third law is every action there's an equal opposite reaction. The first one, an object in motion stays in motion. There we go. Okay. Right. So first law, object in motion stays in motion. Second, force equals mass times acceleration. Third equals every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Right. But again, how did Newton find out about those things? How did he figure out those three laws? Well, to him, right, the apple fell, right? And he discovered, well, how did the apple fall, right? How did it fall down? And that's how he got gravity, right? He discovered and he was like, wait, the earth is pulling it down, right? And also the object is in motion, so it's gonna stay in motion because when the object is stopped, right, it's not moving. But if I were to chuck this tennis ball, it will stay in motion. And then again, the force I put behind throwing the tennis ball is determined by the mass and my acceleration. And then if the tennis ball bounces on my head, it's gonna bounce back because it hasn't like it cannot push me. I like its reaction. It's gonna have all that inertia that gets pushed back because it's not moving. I'm an immovable object to the ball, right? So it's just gonna bounce back. Um, in person, I'm better at those because I have an actual example. I do. But again, Isaac Newton starts inspiring other people looking for formulas to apply to other realms of nature. right? So that's how people start figuring out other things about science. And so now observations can now challenge what people thought was set in stone, right? Let me observe the world and let me change what's going on, right? This theory of what's going on, right? Instead of just, oh, this is the final say, this is what it is. So enlightenment's huge because now people are thinking, right? And so again, my meme, right? Enlightenment thinkers when they have an idea because typically they observe it, they do experiments, and then they figure stuff out. Hence why in science, if you ever wonder why you do experiments, it comes from this era, right? They make a hypothesis, right? They make a theory, they observe it, they experiment, boom, right? So that's the scientific method, is essentially what they create in the Enlightenment era. So if you ever have to do another science experiment comes from this. So now the politics, right? Enlightenment wasn't just thinking about how the natural world works, it's also about our world, right? In the sense of society. So John Locke, again, was the most influential Enlightenment thinker, also known as kind of this father of liberalism, or you could kind of say it as like freedom, right? Or free will. Um, Human experience or observation combined with human reason allowed to flourish through freedom of expression will bring about progress. Now, if you're probably saying there like, what did I just say? Let's go through that again, right? Human experience or observation combined with human reasoning is allowed to flourish through freedom of expression. You're able to think outside the box when you are able to be free, right? Is basically what he's saying. He's saying when you're not restricted to this echo chamber of always hearing the same thing and not being allowed to think for yourself and not having these freedoms, then there'll be no progress. But if you are able to think for yourself and you are able to break out of that echo chamber, then you start questioning the world and questioning the thing that you were stuck in. Is that really the reality of the world? Hence why, if you guys uh if you guys know much, why they always say that like college kids are always like thinking differently than their parents when they get to college, because most part kids are stuck in their echo chamber of their families, and when they go to college they start having that freedom of expression, right? You'll see college kids doing things they're not supposed to, or dressing differently, dyeing their hair, right? Those freedoms of expressions were things that you weren't allowed to do or restricted to do while under your parents' household. Then when you start seeing the world for what it really is and you start being adult, you start questioning a lot of the things, hence why a lot of college kids stop agreeing with their parents and go the opposite, whether it's in politics, economics, whatever views it is. But that's basically what he's saying, right? When you get out of those restrictions, you begin to start questioning. And then in this era, there's a lot, right? They rationalized slavery. That means they validated or argued for it, but also says society is like a contract, right? Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a famous French Enlightenment thinker, he wrote about this social construct too, or contract too. A lot of things I can go into depth, but you guys wouldn't understand. But basically, they always try to explain the unexplainable, right? Again, slavery. How do you explain slavery? It's inhumane, right? But again, they rationalize and they try to explain it. Um, and eventually down comes down to everything. What Enlightenment thinking, especially the politics side of it, came down to is that in a state of nature, right? So in a world, right? That's what in a state of nature means. In a world, all men are equal. Now, again, you have to think, they're not, when they say all men, right? It means everyone, right? Women included, children included, everyone. But when they're writing, they're thinking about them and the people around them. So they use men. So a lot of Enlightenment thinking, instead of saying people, they just say men. Hence why the Declaration of Independence is, what is it? It's something with man, like all men are considered or will be equal or something like that. But again, it says men and not people. Uh, so, and again, speaking of the Declaration, right? John Locke created this idea basically of that everyone should have life, liberty, and property, right? You should have your life to do what you want to do it. You should have liberty or the freedoms, and everyone should be able to access property or kind of have a house, right? Uh, we all know him, Thomas Jefferson, took that idea because he studied a lot of Locke. And so in our Declaration of Independence, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Instead of property. But That idea is basically backing up this in the state of nature, all men are equal, right? These are the things you need to be considered equal, right? How we can all be considered human is if we all have access to this. And in times we've saw throughout, there was always the people who are always at the top and people always at the bottom. There's never like people are on the same playing field. And this is what they're making the argument for is how do we get to this level where everyone is equal? How do we get to this level where kings are not just kings, right? How do we get to where people can rule a society and be considered equal? Hence why we start getting democracy. Hence why we start getting these politics and governments that get away from the one ruler and the groups of people are ruling. Uh, and so society and government are bound contractually. And what that means is if the government fails to protect its people's rights, then they can be forcefully removed. That's the contract, right? The people in charge, if you aren't doing what's right, if you're not providing life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness, then we as a people have the right to take you out of power. Uh, again, uh, now how do you do that? It's completely different from the Enlightenment era to now, right? But we're starting to see a little bit even now. If you were caught up on the news, there's a lot of protest happening. Back then, they protested the government when it's not going the way it should be going. That's the form of the people basically telling the government, it's time for you to get out. And this is coming from this Enlightenment thing. People are now challenging the government, right? They're thinking outside the box. They're realizing I have my freedoms and you're taking them away. I don't like that. This thought never been thought of before, but is coming into now this whole new era where people are thinking about these things. And I said thinking a lot, and I really do mean it, right? This is this era where people are now starting to question the world and question government, question authority, question science, question the church. We're getting to the academics, right? And so here we have sort of a little excerpt from John Locke's argument in the two treatises of government. So basically, this is the foundation for saying we should be ruling by a people and not just one person. This is basically summing it up in like in a seventh grade level. But a quote from this is, whensoever, therefore, the legislative or the government shall transgress, so shall kind of overcome this fundamental rule of society, right? So key rule to us as a people, and either by ambition, fear, folly, or corruption endeavor to grasp themselves or put into the hands of absolute power over the lives, liberties, and estates or property of the people. By this breach of trust, they forfeit the power, and the people had put the they excuse me trust they forfeit the power the people had put into their hands. So breaking this down, if you just like, what is that? This is alignment thinking. Like this is alignment thinking. It's stuff you'll probably never understand. It takes me hours to just comprehend some of these things. But what he's basically saying is that whensoever, therefore, the legislative, so when the government decides to think they're better than the people or rule of society, and whether they start ruling by carelessness or ambition, fear or corruption, right? If they fail to control themselves and reach for that absolute power where they're the only things here and the people have no say now, this breaks the trust that the people gives the government, and so the people now have the opportunity to take it from them. Is basically what he's arguing. He's arguing if the government messes up, the people are coming for you, right? And so this is this new idea of that he's now making commentary or talking about governments and people in power. When before, if you said anything about the king, off with your head, right? If you challenge the authority of the ruling place, off with your head, right? Now we're getting people thinking about ways to overthrow the government if the government isn't doing things for us, right? Now, Locke is not a revolutionary, but he inspires revolutions. Uh, and again, I'll say this, but he inspires the American Revolution. A lot of the thinking, a lot of our foundation for our founding documents, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, comes from Locke and comes from Enlightenment thinkers. Okay, out of the Enlightenment era, right? Like kind of in the same era, right? But out of that topic. Now We talked about Spain, we talked about Netherlands, we talked about the Portuguese, right? But obviously, no, right? Uh, I'm not gonna fast forward all the way, but I'm gonna fast forward. I think I have it here, right? Is that if you look here, the dark red is Britain. Britain has most of the world, right? Spain, of course, has its power, but Spain's starting to lose its power. Portugal's starting to lose its power. And as you can see, Britain, France, all of them are on the rise, right? So Britain's on the rise. And how did Britain gain dominance? And the answer is the Seven Years' War, which is an American thing, an American and Napoleon. So the Seven Years' War was kind of considered the first world war. And my meaning is that it's the first war to take place in several parts of the world. So hence the First World War. And don't get confused with World War One, right? This is called the Seven Years' War, right? This is almost 200 years before World War One, but can be considered the First World War. It was in 1756 to 1763. And if you know anything about American history, uh, America got its independence in 1776, right? So kind of very important that this happened almost a decade before our independence. Britain wanted more land so that they can trade. So they wanted to expand their colonies. The French were in the way of the British expanding, so the two battled on almost every continent they had land on. So they had the Americas, they had Africa, and they had Asia, right? So three different continents and Europe, right? So the four major continents they're battling on, right? Uh, on the American front, wars on the American front, wars fought in British colonies against French colonies, right? So on America, uh, it was the French against the British in the British colonies. George Washington, our first president, fought for the British before he fought for the American Revolution. Britain beat the French in the Americas, right? So Britain won in the American front. On the Caribbean front, French and the Spanish teamed up against the British to protect the sugarcane colonies, right? So the Bahamas and all that. Guess what? British beat them too. Britain's kind of now coming into power. This is also the era of industrialization. So Britain's weaponry and Britain's skills are up there in levels. And so Britain too owed France, right? So France is not looking good. The British East India Company, who essentially was a standing army, right, that was started colonizing India, right? The British East India Company was this basically a moving British empire. They had the same authority as the British did in England, right? So it's like the British East India Company wasn't just there for trade; they were there for conquering. And so they started colonizing India. They started taking over India and fought with colonized Indians and defeated the French trading colonies in Southeast Asia. France is 0-3 against Britain, right? France lost so bad. Uh, oh, they also fought in Africa, and the French lost that too, right? So the moral of the story is France lost its global influence to Britain. All the French colonies went over to the British, right? Like that's why Canada is now considered British. They lost out in the Americas, right? Those colonies in the Caribbeans lost that to the British, hence why Britain influence. Southeast Asia, all Britain, right? So Britain basically owed for the French and said, give me all your goods, right? So France, and this is the reputation that France gets to, where like France always loses big wars. It's because they on the big stage, they're fumbling, right? It's like Chris Paul in the playoffs, right? Or on the main stage, or Josh Allen in the playoffs, right? You're losing against scrubs, you know? And it's the British are not scrubs, but they have power. But like Britain kind of show their dominance. They kind of just wipe the floor. And if we look here, right? Uh, blue, of course, is France. Yellow is Britain, right? And kind of who are allies with them. You look over here on the left side, right? British colonies. They got Canada. They got a lot of this territory in the middle, the Louisiana territory. Still not Louisiana, but like kind of the Midwest area. Caribbeans are all them, right? Britain got all this. India, right? Britain got all this. Britain clean shop, right? That's really what happened, right? And France got cooked. Um, And after all this, France immediately ran back to Africa and invest all of our resources in Africa. We'll talk about that later this week, but like France just relied on Africa. Whereas England was like, I'm gonna take everything else. Uh, so, right, back to oh, right? So back to how did Britain gain dominance? So we saw that basically for the French. And now there's two answers again, right? The Seven Years' War and Napoleon. So what happened with the Seven Years' War uh, is taxes. That's a big thing to think about. Wars are not cheap at all, right? And so Britain and France both spent so much money. And so I think about it, you're fighting on four different continents, right? A lot of money at this time. And so Britain basically needed more money. And not even Britain, like all of Europe is completely and utterly broke, and they had no money at all, right? And so the other big thing is that European monarchs in the 18th century, so the 1700s, could raise standing armies instead of relying on mercenaries. So they spent the money that they did on mercenaries to drip out their people, right? They got them rifles, they got them uniforms, they got them cannons, and all these things are tremendous expenses that they never had to pay for before. They didn't have to pay for uniforms, they didn't have to pay for weaponry, they didn't have to pay for the ships, right? But now you're spending all this cash to fight this war. So you're dripped out, but the consequences of being dripped out is you got to pay for it. And so, uh, and also new tech too is also super expensive, like the cannons, the weapons, right? Uh, this is also where we begin to see Europeans' country fighting in honor for their country. So the drip plays a key factor too, right? Um, and we'll look so you can see here. That's why I was pausing for a second. I was like, did I want to go on or not? But yeah, if you look here to the left, we have the British, and to the right, we have the French, right? The British red coats, and the French blue coats. But again, this idea of nationalism, which is going to be huge in our era now, and we'll talk about that. It'll be one of our vocab words. But right, the British are repping their country, the French are repping their country, and it's now a battle of which country is better. And again, Britain 4-0'd French, so clearly the British won better, right? And so back to taxes, right? So the English taxed American colonies to make up for the debt they were in. The English were taxing tea, they were taxing stamps, they were taxing anything they could. They taxed, and the Americans hated it. Like we hated the fact that we were getting taxed so much and we were not being represented in English Parliament or English government. And also, the French taxed the commoners and the peasants of France outrageous amounts, right? So much more because, again, how do governments make money? They tax, right? So they're taxing the people. Big no-no for a government. Do not take the money away from the people because what are the people going to do? Have a revolution, right? So vive la révolution. The French version, the French and American kind of coincide, right? And it goes on this idea of no taxation without representation, right? This was the whole foundation for the American Revolution. So again, American Revolution, consequence of the Seven-Year War and the spread of Enlightenment thinking. They raised taxes because countries spent too much, right? So Britain spent too much, so they raised the taxes on the Americans. So the Americans now with this Enlightenment thinking of, wait, if the government is not treating me the way I should, things need to change, right? So now they're having this idea of no taxation without representation. We need to be a part of the government, right? And so Thomas Jefferson, again, fighting off John Locke of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So all those things that seemed like it was crazy that we were talking about them like 20 minutes ago, they're now all coming to play, right? Enlightenment is changing the scheme of the world because now people are starting to question, right? People are starting to fight back this rebellious spirit. The Americans revolt in 1776. Now let's jump to the right side. The French, right? Again, tax the commoners, you tax the people. They're fed up with the kings eating, the kings and queens like Marie Antoinette. She's eating the cake. The peasants can't even get bread, right? So off with her head, right? Bars. Right? So the commoners wanted more representation in France. Louis the 16th gave false hope by allowing more commoners to get represented. Commoners take to the street because they realized we're not really being allowed to represent ourselves. They were fake seats that had no authority in the government. And so what's funny is Louis the 16th actually fled France, but they brought him back to the public square to be executed. They said, They tracked him down. Like he left France. He was gone. He was long gone. And they tracked him down to this random village in the middle of France, like in the middle of the countryside of France, brought him back to like Paris, and then chopped his head off. Like they were not playing around. Whereas the Americans were more of like a breakup letter. We're like, it's not you, it's me. Bye, Britain. French said, no, 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 no. We're chopping your head off. Right? So they were more extreme. Whereas the Americans, we were not. But uh, yeah, right. Again, you pushed people to the brink because they had no money, and so now they're going to revolt to this Enlightenment thinking. And so, in terms, Britain loses a big colony in the Americas. They make a lot of money from the Americas. France lost all their colonies to Britain, so France is just poor, right? France is just struggling. But Britain loses a big colony, right? And so Britain's kind of power hungry now. They're like, we lost a big chunk, we want more, right? But there's one more key factor. Napoleon, right? Napoleon locked in, bro. Like after the 7 Years' War and the French Revolution, France was trying to find its place in the world because now you lost everything you had in the world. You're just France now, right? So Napoleon Bonaparte uses nationalism or this feeling that your nation or your country is the best in the world and gets the French people on board with a power-hungry France, right? He's basically telling the people, we've been humiliated by Britain. We got shown on this main stage that we're losers. Let's not do it and let's show everyone France is the best. This is what Napoleon's doing. The people are like, yeah, Napoleon, let's go, right? So Napoleon didn't want to conquer the world like most European countries at the time. Instead, Napoleon didn't want to conquer the world like most European countries at the time. Napoleon thought more intrinsically than extrinsically, right? He thought more of, no, 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 not the whole world, right? We're competing with Europe. How about we take Europe, right? So Napoleon wanted Europe. And so Napoleon starts invading European countries and taking them over, right? So Napoleon's the predecessor to Hitler, right? He's the one who's kind of establishing this game plan of what do you take, how do you take it, and what strategic points you make to conquer Europe. Oh, I just spit everywhere. All right. He takes over Spain and installs his brother Joseph Bonaparte as the king of Spain. Terrible news for Spain. Spain goes downhill now, right? So Spain's cooked after this, right? So Spain, we talked about having a lot of power, cooked, gone, right? Uh, Joseph ended the Spanish conquest and allowed for freedom of religion in Spain. Huge for the Spanish people, but not for the Spanish Empire, right? And so the empire crumbled as the people rose. Meaning all the colonies of Spain no longer was under strict Spanish control because of Napoleon taking over Spain. Right? And so Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars, right? And basically what he did was he showed the world that like he was legit. The French started balling and took most of Europe, right? All of Europe was basically French in the 1800s. And so, I mean, if you look at the independent states, you have Britain, Portugal, Africa, and then Russia and the Ottomans, which two things. Ottomans kind of are far superior at this point, so it's like you don't really want to mess with them yet. Um, and then Russia's not really doing much at this point, but Russia has weather. So it's like you can't really go into Russia or you're gonna get like what we have outside with all this snow. Like there's no way we're trekking a whole army through that. At least that's what most reasonable people would think. Napoleon, on the other hand, pushed into Russia during the winter, lost because of the weather. And so the Napoleon French Empire fell for him trying to conquer Russia. Uh, so that's basically Napoleon. So like, and the reason why I said this gained British dominance and British power is also because he's taking over all the other European countries that are also doing the expanding around the world. So while he's focused on Europe, all the people from around the world got to bring all their resources back to Europe, meaning the rest of the world is kind of free from European control. And so the British kind of swoops in and like just cleans up the pieces, right? So the British not only foiled the French, made Napoleon go on this rampage in Europe, and then kind of sneaked away and then just conquered everything. Like the Britain played it smart and strategically. So back to revolution, right? Oh my God, not me getting bigger. Okay, right. Back to the revolutions of the Americas, right? You see this all happens in quick succession, right? Napoleon, right? His empire was 1812, right? His brother kind of took into power early 1800s, maybe 1805, 1806. I don't know the exact date. But look at this. The Mexican War for Independence, 1810. Mexican Constitution, 1824. Argentina War for Independence, 1810. Independence of Paraguay, 1811. Right. So, Simon Bolivar wins Grand Colombia. That's like Colombia, Venezuela, all that. 1824, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama. Right. Brazil's independence, even though it's Portuguese, and they're not really independent because it's the Portuguese coming that save. It's the Portuguese escaping Portugal from Europe, right? So that's why it's like independence, not really. Um, they eventually get their independence in 1888 when Brazil abolishes slavery and becomes a republic in 89. But they started in 28, right? These revolutions showcase the beginning of Spain's decline as a great power and the rise of other European countries, specifically the British. But again, it also shows Napoleon's causing havoc in Europe, right? He's out here making these countries come back to Europe to fight him, right? He's basically like, I'm that guy. You can't survive unless you're bringing everything back. So they're bringing all their resources back to fight Napoleon, right? So Napoleon is causing a lot of damage in Europe. The rest of the world gets a big like from European powers, right? So again, if we look at our map, uh, left is you look all these places controlled by British, Dutch, French, Portuguese, and then oh my thing's covering it, right? 1800. Then 30 years later, most of them are independent. All because of Napoleon. Napoleon came in and wreaked havoc. If you even look too, the United States, I said this last time. I'm pointing to the screen like you guys can see me. But the Louisiana territory, right, where you see my mouse, kind of this big chunk of the Midwest that we call now, and like Louisiana right there. Napoleon sold that to the United States so he could keep causing havoc in Europe. He sold it for like $8 billion to cause havoc in Europe. He was like, I don't need that territories. I need Europe. And so that's how America expanded westward, right? And westward expansion, you'll learn about that in eighth grade. But Napoleon's a big factor for that. Like, so Napoleon is altering the world scale by making Europe come back to Europe. And that's a key point to think about. And I have this map again, right? Because this is now the 1700s, so like, right before Napoleon, right before all that. But look at the extent of the world, right? Africa is mainly French because French lost all their other places, right? So they jumped to Africa before everybody else did. After this, we're going to learn about this week. We're going to get something called a scramble for Africa because French doesn't keep all this territory, right? They keep a large part of it, but they don't keep a lot of it. Another thing they lose. But if you look for the most part, the Ottomans, the Muslims still control a big chunk of North Africa, start of Asia Minor. Then you get the Russians kind of coming to the scene now. Chinese are just by themselves, keeping to themselves. The British are now involved in a lot of things. The French come back to Asia a little bit, right? So the world is now dominated by Europe. And then here's towards the end of imperialism. I talked about that scramble for Africa, right? And the reason why I'm showing you these two maps, right? Because if you see Britain and Spain had all this, and then the rest of the world kind of wasn't touched. But now when you look at this, like the rest of the world is touched, specifically Africa. Like, look, Africa had large chunks of it, whereas like wasn't touched by many people. Now it's conquered by a lot of things. And the reason for that is what you guys kind of read the other day, right? The imperialism. That's the second wave of colonialism, with the only difference is they're not staying in the land anymore, right? If you think about our first wave, the Spanish and English stayed in the Americas, right? That was a colony of them. They stayed there. Imperialism, they're going into the place, taking what they need and leaving. But as you look, Europe has lost a lot of money. Europe is advancing its technologies, right? We see new warfare, we see new weaponry, we see new items, we see new industry, new factories, right? The industrialization, now the tech, right? I don't have my phone on me, but right, headphones, right? This new tech, right? The computer, what I'm streaming on, we have this new tech. We need new need for resources because we've used them all up for all the wars we're having in Europe. And now, right, we need new resources. How are we getting those resources? Well, we can't go back to these new colonies, our first colonies, because they're all independent countries now, which are people in there, right? So it's our people. We can't come in and invade our people. They're gonna fight back, right? America will fight back. Plus, America at this time kind of set up this line, right? Imagine this line in between Africa. I'm pointing to the screen like you guys can actually see me, right? But imagine just like a line down the middle between Africa and the Americas. Basically, the United States said if Europe tries to come back over here, they're gone, right? We will end them. And so Europe's kind of scared because America kind of proved themselves with the revolution and then the War of 1812 and a bunch of other stuff. So Europe's like, let's not mess with them. Instead, we know Africa, we know they got a lot of resources still. Let's dive into that. All right. And then Asia, let's focus more attention on that than our other colonies over there. Hence why the British stayed a lot in India, especially during the 1800s to 1900s. Britain tried to get China, and we'll talk about the Opium Wars and all that. Britain actually did a lot of work in China. Australia now, right? Parts of the Middle East. So now our world is at the imperialism level, right? We are here. I think this is it. Yeah, right. Geez, that was catching us up to now where we're at, right? So I had to catch us up on the European. I was able to do that, the European perspective. I was able to do that with 2 lectures. So I feel accomplished. But Europe went through a lot in a very short span, right? Realistically, it kicked off in 1400 and now we're in 19. So 500 years compared to the rest of the world had thousands and thousands of years. And if you like really think about it, Europe had to catch up and then go past them. And they did that in such this short span because of going to all these other places, which was kind of unthinkable because nobody really thought about the world being connected until Europe was like, let's start exploring, right? So I say all this to really showcase that seizure warning, right? Not walls, right? I showcase this to basically say that like the age of exploration leads us all the way to I'm just gonna do this. Leads us all the way back to this, right? So if the Europe doesn't start exploring, we don't get this. We don't get today. Right. So that is kind of that first domino for this era, right? And we talked about the Roman Republic being the first domino, but like to get this, you need exploration. All right. Uh, I hope this made sense. Oh my God. Excuse me. I hope this made sense. The assignment, if you made it this far, just main idea from each slide into the notes. Nothing too crazy. I'm just gonna do that to see if you are actually paying attention to the slides. What I really just want you to do is just sit there and just listen, right? Okay. With that said, peace out.